Okay. Well, good evening. I want to welcome you to the July 19th, 2021 meeting of the Pacifica Planning Commission. And before we move to the agenda proper, I wanted to say a few words about the way the meeting is going to be conducted this evening. Particularly, specifically, this meeting will be conducted pursuant to the provisions of the Governor's Executive Order N-0821, which suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act. This meeting is necessary so that the city can conduct necessary business and is permitted under the order as an essential governmental function. Commissioners, the assistant city attorney, and city staff essential to this meeting will be video teleconferencing into the meeting, and there will be no physical location open to the public. The public can observe the meeting while sheltering at home via the Zoom link as the primary means of participation, or via the cable channel 26 or live stream broadcasts as alternate methods of viewing the meeting. Participation via the Zoom link will enable the meeting to be observed live and will enable the public to speak during the public comment periods. The Zoom link was published in the meeting agenda. Live public comments are being accepted at this meeting in place of emailed public comments. Public comments may be provided live by members of the public utilizing the Zoom link to participate in the meeting. Utilize the raise hand function in the Zoom application on a computer, on a smartphone or a tablet, or else enter *9 to raise your hand if you're dialing in by phone. Please ensure your name is correctly entered in your Zoom profile so city staff may properly identify you when it's your turn to speak. Those dialing in by phone will be called to speak by the last 4 digits of their phone number as shown in the Zoom interface. With that said, we'll go ahead then and move on to the agenda proper, and I'll ask that we start with a roll call, please.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Berman.
Present.
Commissioner Domerat.
Present.
Commissioner Godwin.
Present.
Commissioner Hauser.
Present.
Commissioner Leal.
Present.
Commissioner Niblin.
Present. Thank you. That then will take us to the salute to the flag, and I'll ask Commissioner Hauser to please lead us in the salute to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Hauser. And that then will take us to administrative business. And the first order of administrative business is for us to approve the order of agenda. Is there a motion to approve the order of agenda? Commissioner Berman.
I move that we approve the order of agenda.
Thank you. Commissioner Berman has moved that we approve the order of agenda. Commissioner Godwin.
I second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the order of agenda. Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Berman.
Yes.
Commissioner Domerat.
Yes.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yes.
Commissioner Hauser.
Yes.
Commissioner Leal.
Yes.
Commissioner Niblin.
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. So the next item of administrative business is approval of the minutes for our meeting of June 21st, 2021. Is there any discussion with respect to these minutes or alternatively a motion to approve the minutes for our meeting of June 21st, 2021? It's looking like maybe a motion is in order. I don't see anybody interested in discussing the matter. Commissioner Godwin.
I move we approve the order of the minutes for June 21st.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve the minutes of June 21st. Commissioner Berman.
A second.
Motion and a second to approve those minutes. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Berman.
Yes.
Commissioner Domerat.
Yes.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yes.
Commissioner Hauser.
Yes.
Commissioner Leal.
Yes.
Commissioner Niblin.
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. So the next item of administrative business is to designate a liaison to the city council meeting. And it appears that we'd be looking at the city council meeting of August 9th, 2021. Mr. Murdoch, could you tell us a little more about this matter, please? Or these matters?
Of course, Chair. So the first is the Lot 3 Harmony at 1 appeals. That is a planning commission approval of a single family residence in the Harmony at 1, also known as the Ohlone Point subdivision near Roberts Road and Fassler Road. That one has 2 appeals, and we would need a liaison from the commission for that. I'll note that Chair Niblin, you were absent from that hearing, and so it may be appropriate to have a liaison who was in attendance. Otherwise, if you are the liaison, you can familiarize yourself with the record. And then the second matter is the public hearing for tonight's agenda, which is the text amendment for the accessory dwelling unit and reasonable accommodation ordinance. And so assuming the commission acts on that, either with a recommendation to approve or to not approve that ordinance, we would ask for a liaison for that item as well.
Thank you, Mr. Murdoch. Well, I'll ask then my colleagues to weigh in. Anybody available, interested, willing to serve as liaison for one or both of those matters? Commissioner Hauser.
Thank you. So I know that before this got the appeal, at least before it got moved, I had volunteered to be the liaison, but unfortunately August 9th, I'm not free, but if it does move again, I'm happy to liaise.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Anybody else who perhaps might have availability for the evening of August 9th, preferably somebody who was there to hear the merits of the Lot 3 Harmony at 1 project there. Let's see here. Checking a calendar here. Commissioner Godwin.
I can do it if nobody else is interested.
Well, I appreciate you saving us from awkward silence, and I would definitely, I think, would take you up on your offer to represent the commission and liaise with the city council for that on August 9th. So I think I don't think we actually need a vote on this. I think we'll just go ahead. I'll just go ahead and accept your indicated willingness to do so. Is that okay, Mr. Murdoch?
That's fine, Chair. It's the chair's prerogative with respect to the liaison. I would just ask for confirmation that's for both items on August 9th with Commissioner Godwin serving as liaison.
Commissioner Godwin, will that work for you to include the matter that we'll be acting on this evening?
I think so. I think I understand this one as well as the Harmony appeal.
Great. And again, I appreciate your willingness to step into the breach on it.
No problem.
Great. So that'll take us then to oral communications. And this is the portion of the agenda that's available to the public to address the Planning Commission on any issue within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission that is not on the agenda. The time allowed for any speaker will be 3 minutes. So Mr. Murdoch, I'll ask you to help us identify whether or not we have any speakers and to help us shepherd them through the process.
Thank you, Chair. I don't see any hands raised at this time from those in the attendee list.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead then and move on from that portion of the agenda. I'll confirm that we don't have any consent items. And that will take us then to new public hearings. And we have one new public hearing for this evening. It is TA 120-21, and this is file numbers 2019-019 and 2019-031. And this is text amendment TA 120-21, and this is initiated by the City of Pacifica to amend various municipal code provisions that relate to the permitting of accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units, and that relate to reasonable accommodation process in order to implement provisions of the city's local coastal program as certified by the California Coastal Commission. The recommended CEQA action is that this process is exempt pursuant to CEQA guidelines sections 15061B3, 15282 sub H, 15301, 15302, and 15303. And staff's recommendation with respect to action is that we adopt the attached resolution initiating the text amendment and recommending approval to the City Council. So I'll go ahead and ask for a staff report, please.
Good evening, Chair Niblin and Commissioners. I am Associate Planner Bonnie O'Connor. Over the last several years, the City of Pacifica has adopted 3 ordinances with text amendments related to the accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and junior accessory dwelling units, or JADUs, to maintain consistency with changing state law. As detailed in the ADU ordinances and mandated by state regulations, local text amendments do not take effect in the Pacific Coastal Zone until the California Coastal Commission certifies the text amendments as part of the city's Local Coastal Program, or LCP. Since March of last year, city staff has been working with the Coastal Commission staff on the LCP amendment for the text amendments in the ADU ordinance and the additional text amendment ordinance related to the creation of a reasonable accommodation process adopted by City Council in November 2019. On June 9th, 2021, the Coastal Commission conditionally certified the LCP amendment with modifications. The modifications included by the Coastal Commission as part of their certification would amend the parking standards for the ADUs in the coastal zone. Specifically, ADUs within the created coastal access parking areas would be required to provide 1 parking space per ADU and replacement parking for any primary dwelling permit parking that is removed as a result of the creation of an ADU. This coastal access parking area generally contains areas within 1/4 mile walking distance from public coastal access points as listed in the LCP. Maps of these areas are attached to the draft ordinance. The modifications would also broaden the provisions in which required ADU parking or replacement parking could be provided on a site. Parking standards for ADUs in the coastal zone, but outside of the coastal access parking areas, will not be affected. The Coastal Commission also included modifications which would remove all of the amendments made to the coastal development permit exemption and exclusion language stating that the LCP amendment was not the appropriate method to expand that language without an amendment to the Coastal Act or the category exclusion order. City staff does not find that the applicability of the exemptions or categories of excluded development to ADUs and JADUs would substantially change as a result of the rejection of the city's amendments to these sections, but it will reduce the clarity to the public of the applicability of the exemptions and categories of exclusions to these developments. The Coastal Commission included 1 modification related to the reasonable accommodation ordinance. They found an additional finding was necessary to ensure that the accommodations did not result in significant coastal resource impacts. Staff recommends that the commission move to recommend this ordinance to the City Council for adoption without revision to avoid further delays to the ADU applicants waiting to proceed with their projects in the coastal zone. Any modifications to the draft ordinance as proposed could potentially require a subsequent LCP amendment and certification by the Coastal Commission, which presents the possibility of a significant delay prior to taking effect in the coastal zone. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connor, for that report. Colleagues, any questions, comments for Ms. O'Connor or other staff members? Oh, please, Commissioner Hauser.
No, I think the staff report and the presentation were very clear. I just wanted to ask, and this wouldn't affect anything in the ordinance, but I wanted to ask how many ADUs we do have in the pipeline.
We have at least 2 ADUs that are triggering the need for a coastal development permit. And we have a handful of other ADUs in the coastal zone that would just require a building permit, but all of them are stalled at this point.
Okay, and do they have sufficient space for the parking?
Yes, both applications that require the CDPs would have, well, actually only one of them would be affected by this change, and that project would have adequate space.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to actually follow up Commissioner Hauser's question, and maybe it's not so much a follow-up as a different, slightly different subject. My recollection, going back to the various times where we've considered these text amendments more broadly, is that we were really essentially doing things that the state was telling us to do, and that this kind of constricting, for example, or whittling away of parking requirements is really something that I thought was kind of driven by state law. So I'm really interested in kind of how maybe the changes to the government code that were, or whatever code it was, frankly, that sort of imposed these kind of more liberal looser standards, as it were, for ADUs interfaces with the Coastal Act, and whether or not there's been an analysis of all that, because, actually the ADU stuff comes later in time than the stuff that's in the Coastal Act. So I don't know if maybe Ms. O'Connor or the city attorney or somebody has thought about that and maybe has some analysis they can share with us around those that broad kind of loosely stated question.
Well, I'll let my colleagues step in, but I guess I'll start by responding to your question. That exact question is discussed in the Coastal Commission's staff report to their commissioners as attachment B to our staff report tonight. And basically, they reference the saving clause in the ADU state regulations that identifies the need to address the for consistency with the Coastal Act and to address the impacts to coastal resources. And so Coastal Commission staff made the argument and the claim that they've communicated with staff at Housing and Community Development that this parking requirement to preserve coastal access was appropriate and can be implemented.
I see. Are we, not to put anybody on the spot, but are we just broadly comfortable with the Coastal Commission's analysis and all that? I mean, it strikes me that that's a kind of an open legal issue that reasonable folks could disagree on, I suppose. I'm curious about, maybe Ms. Bazzano could perhaps share her perspective.
Yes, thanks, Chair Niblin. This is an open legal issue. I think that the Coastal Commission's reliance is upon section 65852.2L, which just basically provides that the nothing in the statute supersedes the or in any way alters or lessens the effect or application of the California Coastal Act of 1976, except that the local government shall not be required to hold public hearings for coastal development permit applications for accessory dwelling units. So it remains to be seen how courts will analyze that saving clause, because that is a relatively new change to the law. And HCD, this ordinance will still be reviewed by, or the ordinance amendments will still be submitted to the HCD as well for their review. So they still have an opportunity to comment upon the changes. But the Coastal Commission's position is that these changes are necessary to conform to the Coastal Act.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Commissioner Leal.
Hi, thanks. My question is around, so it sounds like the one current ADU application is not affected by, doesn't seem to be affected by this. If a property was affected by this in terms of not being able to put on a parking space for whatever reason, lot size, which especially in the Shark Park area, there's some odd lot sizes, and so they may not be able to accommodate it. What is the process for perhaps still moving forward with the ADU? Is there a process to move forward? Would that come before the Planning Commission as a variance as part of the process, or what would happen there?
So a variance process is not a process that's available for ADUs. But if a ADU project was not able to accommodate a parking space on site, even with the standards that we've brought in with the language we're showing you tonight, the option really could be to revise their design or their type of ADU, maybe reduce it down to a junior ADU, or instead of adding on to their house, converting existing space of their house into a junior ADU. So their options may be limited, but there could be some.
Okay, thanks. That was my only question.
Thank you, Commissioner Leal. Commissioner Berman.
I have a couple more detailed questions. I'm going to try to lump them together because I think a lot of them are related. And I'm mainly asking these questions because effectively the amendments kind of set a precedent for effectively ADUs development moving forward kind of throughout the city. But my questions are more specific for the coastal zone. So in section 2 regarding the parking, I know there's mention of adding parking on site, either parallel or perpendicular to the driveway, but utilizing the, existing driveway or current driveway standards. I could see how that could work in most instances, but I'm wondering if we might back ourselves into a corner. Is there a situation where effectively, if we had to parallel park a stall adjacent to the driveway, so it wouldn't be directly in front of the driveway, and then there's 2 cars already in the driveway, how would that, additional parking stall, how would that car get out? Because I know a lot of homes in Pacifica don't actually use their garages for parking. A lot of cars are actually in the driveway. So if the access to these new stalls is through just a city standard driveway, but then the primary housing unit also has 2 cars in that driveway, are we going to kind of like landlock a parking stall? And then, well, I guess I'll start with that question.
Yeah, that's a fair question. And I think the thought is that there would probably have to be some coordination involved, just as there would be coordination involved in a project that developed tandem parking. So it kind of that same expectation is kind of applied to the tandem parking, which is already allowed. And so broadening it to a parallel parking situation just seemed to be appropriate as well.
And if I could add, good evening, Deputy Director of Planning, Christian Murdoch. We didn't necessarily concoct this scheme of parking with functionality in mind. We concocted it with an accommodation of the Coastal Commission's concerns about the availability of on-street parking in certain locations. And so we agree that it's less than ideal. I think we developed this approach to ensure that we could obtain certification of our ordinance and allow people to build ADUs. At the end of the day, there's nothing to compel them to park in these spaces. And so I think whether or not visitor parking on street is impacted, remains to be seen. But at least it provides availability of a space. And as Ms. O'Connor mentioned, with tandem parking, which is already mandated by state law, or even with someone parking in their garage and having another vehicle parked in their driveway, some degree of coordination may be required to, juggle those spaces from time to time. And on balance, we think the creation of a housing unit is outweighed by whatever parking inconveniences might result in those specific locations. And as to your concern about precedent, I think the applicability of this outside of the coastal access parking areas is likely to be limited. Very few areas in town will require parking for ADUs, and so they wouldn't even be in this scheme of providing parking in these unusual locations. And so I think they may also not be allowed outside of the coastal access parking areas as well. And so I think the applicability of this more broadly outside of the coastal access parking areas, I think is likely to be minimal, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. No, that's logical and reassuring. Then a couple of other questions. One, there was mention of utilizing lift stations. I'm wondering if maybe other commissioners may think that there might be some concern with installing a lift station directly next to an adjacent single family home, and then just the noise associated with lift stations. I know we recently looked at a lift station that was going to go in a parking garage, and there were concerns about noise, but it was kind of reassured that it was in a parking garage. But now we're potentially opening the door to lift stations directly next to your neighbor's bedroom. I'm
Well, that's-
just
that's a
kind of
question.
throwing it out there. I'm thinking ahead,
Yeah.
if we amend this text and then 2 months from now, we have a project come through and they're installing a lift station, we're probably gonna have a lot of comments about that lift station.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, Commissioner Berman. And I read that and just kind of assumed that nobody would ever, in the economics of what we're talking about here, do that. Having said it, I think it's probably an important thing for us to clarify whether or not this language actually authorizes, as opposed to says that's something that might be granted, and whether or not that might be granted discretionarily, because that's really not clear either. I'm maybe staff could help us understand that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair and Vice Chair. I think the concern is well-founded. I think the issue here is that state law requires us to accept automatic parking lifts to accommodate off-street parking. And so I don't think much has changed with respect to that, and Ms. O'Connor can confirm. I think we simply are reflecting what state law requires us to do. And this has been a component of the last several ADU ordinance amendments.
You had me at state law, okay? Yeah, then, sorry, I'm just looking at like 2 more questions. Let's see. Section 3 in the amended text mentioned, and I'm sure I'm probably just not as expert as everyone else here, but mentioned that the ADUs would not be exempt from a CDP. And that makes sense to me. But the fact that the original language put them in kind of a category of exemption, I'm wondering, is there a state law that currently allows for ADUs to be exempt from this kind of, planning permitting process?
There is not that I'm aware of. And the feedback that we received from Coastal Commission was that their guiding language wasn't going to allow us to change our language to use more updated terms. And so, no, I'm not aware of any direct regulations that would exempt ADUs or JADUs. I think the interpretation of the project and how they meet the exemptions and descriptions of the excluded developments might apply to some projects, but not on its face.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is, I know there was mention, if in the future we need to amend this text, we could consider pursuing that. What would be the process if because right now we're kind of what's in front of us tonight is accepting effectively what the Coastal Commission wants or drafted up for our city. Understandably, we might need to make some minor revisions moving forward. What would that process be? Would we have to go back to Coastal Commission?
Yes, any amendments to our local ordinance would require further Coastal Commission certification of those amendments. And so I think what you're asking is what would trigger us to make those amendments in the future?
Yeah.
So ideally, we could lump them in with if there's a future update to the state regulations that staff, has to update, lumping it in with an update that we already have to do would be ideal. If there was the desire from a planning commission or city council to do something sooner or otherwise, I think we would respond to that.
Okay.
Yeah, Vice Chair Berman, I think, the last several amendments that have come to the Planning Commission, City Council, as Ms. O'Connor mentioned, have been in response to changes in state law to ensure that our ordinance complied and therefore was valid rather than null and void as the state law provides. But I think the opportunity exists that the commission or the council may also want to be more lax than state law. So the state law provides maximum standards, but nothing prevents the city from being less restrictive. And so I think it's important to set that construct. not such that we could come back and become more restrictive than state law, but perhaps broaden even more the places where ADUs could be constructed for the size, height, setbacks, et cetera, to make it more permissive.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Those are all my questions for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. And Commissioner Damarad, I know you've had your hand up for a while. I'm sorry. It's now your turn.
It's hurting. So, let's talk about all these things with Americans with Disabilities Act in the back of your mind. Does the city feel that if an ADU for a person with a disability requires an on-street parking that's in the coastal zone, do we have a process that then would just override Coastal Commission's concern because Americans with Disabilities Act may overrule state law?
I don't know if I can speak directly to how ADA requirements would affect our provisions, but you do bring to mind that if such a claim was made under our reasonable accommodation ordinance to apply it to our ADU standards, there may be some relief that we could provide from our standards under that. It would require making sure that that relief or that relief from the standards was consistent with the local coastal program and did not impact coastal resources, as we're being asked to add into our findings for the reasonable accommodation ordinance tonight. But I think that would probably be the section of our code that I would look to address your disability concern.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Damarad. Commissioner Godwin.
Yeah, this question is for Ms. O'Connor. Is there any plan to monitor coastal visitor parking once this ordinance goes into effect to see whether if people choose not to park in their off-street spaces that parking is restricted for coastal visitors or any other such monitoring plans by the city?
There is not.
Thank you. Commissioner Godwin, anything else?
Nope, that was all I wanted to know.
Thank you. Commissioner Leo.
Thank you, Chair. The conversation around kind of the parallel parking with using the same driveway got me thinking about the kind of the intent of the letter, or what I understand is the intent of the letter from the Coastal Commission is basically preserving parking, in some cases commercial or neighborhood parking, depending on the districts here, for out-of-town visitors. I see that this could potentially also be resolved in another manner that I didn't see identified in the report. The use of on-street parking in front of the driveway. And so parallel parking on the street, visitors wouldn't park there anyways. I think it would still meet the intent of the Coastal Commission. It would still require coordination with occupants or occupants of the property. But if they had enough room if they had enough parking, on-site parking for the existing home, and then with the ADU, they would have space that wouldn't take up visitor parking parallel on the street in front of the driveway, assuming the driveway meets the width, or the curb cut meets the width of a standard vehicle size, and that could be defined. Is that an option? Or if not, why not?
That wasn't considered in our discussions with Coastal Commission. One concern with that idea that you touched on was the standard length of a car. a double driveway in the city of Pacifica is the width of 20 feet, which is the width that a parallel spot would, typically be required on the street for one vehicle. So unless that driveway was at its full width, it may not be an option, but yeah, I don't know. That was not a consideration. And really the focus of Coastal Commission's feedback was making that accommodation on the project site as well. And so blocking the driveway would be outside of that focus. But not to say it's not a good point. It just wasn't part of our discussions.
Okay. Yeah, and I know sometimes conversation of on-street parking, not necessarily privatizing public streets, but and I don't see that as the intent of kind of what I'm perhaps suggesting here. It would be more of kind of potentially checking the box in terms of making sure there's enough kind of use parking, reasonable use for the occupants, for that if 72-degree day in Pacifica and the beaches are packed, they at least have enough room on site and off site that they wouldn't have to circle blocks or park over by the beach just to walk home.
Commissioner Leal, I'd like to add, I'm not the most qualified expert, but I'm thinking back to this discussion that I believe was between the city council and the police chief on a similar type of question for a different project. And the question came up about a vehicle blocking one's driveway and whether that was legal or not. And it's my recollection that the police chief indicated that it is illegal to obstruct a driveway under the vehicle code. However, the enforcement would only occur by a property owner asking the police for enforcement to clear his or her own driveway. And so while practically it may work in the manner that you've described, technically we may be directing property owners to violate the vehicle code. And so we'd have to do further analysis on that, in my opinion, to determine whether that's appropriate or if there's some other way to circumvent that legal issue.
Yeah, Mr. Murdoch, actually, the police chief wrote up a little document along the lines you're describing that kind of laid it out in those particular terms. Again, sort of the notion of practically they're not going to enforce as long as nobody's called, but it is in fact technically a violation of the vehicle code. It is, of course, practically the case if you, particularly in San Francisco or other places, it's very common that people block their own driveways because it does in fact free up a space, or it's a space that's just there. So it's certainly something worth exploring. Commissioner Hauser.
I just wanted to ask one more question, and I wanted to make sure I understood a little bit more about why JAD, like, can you just talk a little bit about ADUs and JADUs as far as how this is applying? Why, like, it just seems like a lot for a little teensy JADU.
Sure. So actually the modifications that the Coastal Commission has put in place or has suggested don't affect the JADU parking needs. And so JADUs will continue to not require a parking spot, no matter their location within the coastal parking access area or not. So it will apply to ADUs.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions or clarifications that we have from commissioners at this time. So I think what we want to do is go ahead and move to public comment on this item. So Mr. Murdoch, I'll ask you to help us facilitate that.
Thank you, Chair. At this time, I'm not seeing any hands raised from members of the public. Just a reminder, if you've dialed in by phone, to press *9 to raise your hand. Otherwise, use the raise hand button within the Zoom application if you'd like to speak during public comments on this item.
Okay. Are we seeing any hands at this point?
I see one hand raised, Chair.
Okay,
Allow me
we'll
a
go ahead
moment
and
to set us up for public comment. Suzanne
Looks
Drake,
like-
please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm coming into the discussion late. My question was, and I think that Ms. O'Connor actually addressed it. Do ADUs and junior ADUs require on-site parking, or is street parking okay? That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Drake, for your comment. Mr. Murdoch, any other?
No other hands are raised at this time, Chair.
Thank you. And while it's not ordinarily the case that we necessarily respond to questions that are raised in public comment, maybe Ms. O'Connor, just in light of the comment question we just got, maybe you could just clarify that one point.
Sure. So ADUs and JADUs require an sorry, let me take that back. Junior ADUs will not require an on-site parking spot. ADUs will require an on-site parking spot. The ADUs within the created coastal access parking areas will need to definitely provide those spots on site. If you're outside of the created coastal access parking area, then there are number of exemptions that may apply to your project and will likely apply to your project to prevent you from needing to provide that ADU on site. And so it's a little confusing. There's a lot of steps that we'll have to go through, but in short, an ADU will require an on-site parking spot. If you're outside of the coastal access area, likely an exemption will apply to you to remove that need. If you're within the coastal access area, you will likely have to provide that on site.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connor. That was pretty concise given the complexity. Okay, well, we've had some questions from the commission, some clarifications from staff. We had public comment. Go ahead and bring it back then to the commission for deliberation and ultimately action. So I'll sort of open it up to my fellow commissioners then. Certainly prepared to entertain a motion as well if anybody is prepared to make a motion. Commissioner Berman.
I'm ready to make a motion. It looks like there's no additional questions or comments. I move that the Planning Commission finds the proposed ordinance is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, adopts the resolution included as attachment A to the staff report to initiate text amendment TA-120-21, and recommends approval to the City Council, and incorporates all maps and testimony into the record by reference.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. Commissioner Hauser.
I will second the motion.
Thank you. So we got a motion by Commissioner Berman and a second by Commissioner Berman to approve this matter. So could we get a roll call vote?
Commissioner Berman,
Yes.
Commissioner Domerat,
Yes.
Commissioner Godwin,
Yes.
Commissioner Hauser,
Yes.
Commissioner Leal,
Yes.
Commissioner Niblin,
Yes.
and that motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
And just
Thank-
to clarify, Chair, I believe Commissioner Hauser made the second.
Yeah, you know what? It occurred to me, I said Commissioner Berman's name twice. Thank you.
Double credit for me.
Okay, excellent. So that then will take us to communications, and we'll start with commission communications. Are there any commission communications? Commissioner Hauser.
I just wanted to follow up on the question that I had asked at the last meeting regarding some of the interest that we had been receiving about the Hillside Preservation District. And I was wondering if staff would be able to present the update.
Of course. Thank you, Commissioner Hauser. So we considered the different mechanisms we might use to provide information to the public, to provide the facts and to dispel any confusion surrounding the Hillside Preservation District ordinance. What we are doing is preparing a fact sheet that summarizes the ordinance, includes a link of where anybody can access the actual text of the ordinance, and hopefully to provide some simple examples of how it would apply under different scenarios to ensure that it's more easily understood when this issue comes up for future projects that come before the commission. And our plan is to post that fact sheet on the Planning Department webpage, and then it'll also be a handy resource for the commissioners or other city staff to share with members of the public that might inquire, asking questions about the HPD ordinance.
Well, I really appreciate all of the work and making that available to the public. I think it's really important, and I think it'll be a really nice resource for people, and also to have contact information for the city. So thanks.
Might
welcome.
I
Thank you.
ask or suggest perhaps when this deliverable is kind of prepared and up and posted, maybe at a future commission meeting, do you think we could maybe even set a real quick 5-minute information item where it's agendized as a specific matter that we can spend just a few minutes explaining to the public?
I certainly think that's a possibility, Chair Niblin. I'll just be frank. My concern with having an informational session on the HPD ordinance is that it poses an opportunity for public commenters to bring in comments about specific projects in the
I
HPD
see.
ordinance and could muddle the record for those projects. It's something that I would hope to avoid if we can.
Yeah.
And given that we have no way to control what the public says, I think it might be best to avoid such a discussion if possible, but certainly it's the prerogative of the chair and the planning director to set the agendas for these meetings.
Well, maybe in lieu of that, I understand the concern, and I certainly don't want to have anything happen that might muddy or muddle the record for specific projects. But maybe just a real good focused PR campaign, so that when that information goes out, we are really pushing out in a way that people will. I don't know. It doesn't necessarily require a mailer, but something that city updates or whatever it is that we can do to make sure folks are aware that information's out there.
Sure, we have a number of vehicles to get the information out there, including the Connect with Pacifica newsletter and other social media avenues. And so we'll certainly give careful thought to how we can amplify that information to the broadest possible audience.
Thank you. That sounds more appropriate than what I had in mind. Any other commission communications? All right, we'll move into staff communication.
Nothing to share. Commissioner Hauser inquired about the update I was going to give about responding to her inquiry at the last meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. That then will take us to adjournment. Can we get a motion to adjourn? Commissioner Hauser,
I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
is there a second? Commissioner Godwin.
I second the motion.
So we have a motion and a second to adjourn. Could we get a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Berman,
Yes.
Commissioner Domerat,
Yes.
Commissioner Godwin,
Yes.
Commissioner Hauser,
Yes.
Commissioner Leal,
Yes.
Commissioner Niblin.
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously.
Great. Well, we're adjourned. Everybody have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.